that? 13% of
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes.
About half of all prisoners are black.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do. They commit more murders, they commit more arsons, they commit more kidnappings. For example, blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders. That's not a war on drugs, that's a culture problem.
What he means by blacks commit more crimes is in fact that African Americans are more often convicted of committing crimes in the United States than any other racial demographic.
Shahid Bolson gave an interesting response that is definitely worth looking at. At the end of this video, I would like to know your thoughts on what Shahid had to say in response to Charlie Kirk's comment about why black Americans commit more crimes, even though they make up only about 13 to 15% of the population. Before we get to Shahid's response, I want you to see a slightly longer clip of Charlie Kirk explaining his perspective on why black Americans commit more crimes. Take a listen.
Black people are only 13% of the population, yet they commit 55% of the murders.
Does that make sense?
Why? What percentage of blacks have a father around when they're raised?
I'm not sure.
20%.
So
80% of blacks do not have a stable father around. That is the most predictable way to end up in prison, end up as a murderer or a criminal.
And why
It's
do
not a
you think that's
racism
a
problem. It's not a white supremacy problem. It's a fact that black fathers impregnate women and they don't stay around with the women
And
that they have
why-
impregnated.
Charlie Kirk, do you think that happens more in the black community compared to others?
It's threefold. Number one, we subsidize single motherhood. Number two, it's culture. It's accepted in the black community, and it
Okay,
should
it's
be.
culture. Okay.
Don't take my
I
word
see.
for it. Read Thomas Sowell's own book on how black culture allows single motherhood to continue into a nanny state type practice. 75% of black youth are raised without a father in the home. 75%. Is that a bigger problem or not a bigger problem than whiteness, white privilege, or white supremacy?
Okay, well, that was Charlie Kirk's position on this matter. I should admit that some of the points he made, for me, feel valid, especially his emphasis on fathers not being around and the effects on family structure, though some of his claims I don't agree with. But we'll talk about that a little later.
This is a
Now, let's listen to Shahid Bolson responding to Charlie Kirk's comment.
Well, first of all, what he means by blacks commit more crimes is in fact that African Americans are more often convicted of committing crimes in the United States than any other racial demographic, which is very different from what he said. All of that indicates is that the so-called criminal justice system in the United States is primarily only effective in the selective investigation, prosecution, and conviction of African Americans and other so-called minorities, as opposed to investigating, prosecuting, and convicting white perpetrators. The statistics that he's citing are actually in evidence arguing racial bias in policing, in prosecution, and in trials. It's not an evidence of greater criminality along racial demographic lines, no. Rather, it's only the assignment of criminality that falls along racial lines.
They're gonna make you.
I mean, more than half of all violent crimes in the United States go unsolved, overwhelmingly the case in certain types of violent crimes. So we're not talking actually about a criminal justice system that works, that's actually effective, that's actually efficient, that actually does its job. What we have is a criminal justice system that disproportionately seems to only quote-unquote work when the perpetrators are not white. African-American victims of homicide, by the way, make up most of the victims of homicide cases that go unsolved, whereas most homicide cases in which the victim is white, those get solved. In other words, crimes against white people are more likely to get solved than crimes against African-American people or any other so-called minority group, a member of the global majority. And they're even more likely to get solved when the perpetrator of the crime happens to be African-American. So in other words, if you're a white victim, you're more likely to get justice. And if you're a white perpetrator, you're more likely to escape justice. That's the system. And that's all that is evidenced by what he's saying. So when you look at the number of unsolved crimes, it's not unreasonable to assume that the, say, 60% or so of violent crimes in America that never get solved, that those are very possibly crimes committed by white people against African-American people or against other so-called minority groups. So rather than saying blacks commit more crimes than anyone else in America, it would be more honest to say that no one who commits a crime in America is more likely to be punished for that crime than an African-American. And in fact, it's also more likely for an African-American person to be wrongfully convicted of a crime of which they are accused. And it's more likely for them to even be punished for that, even when they have been proven innocent. And you can look at the case right now of Marcellus Williams. So the statistics that he's citing actually only substantiate the belief that the so-called criminal justice system in the United States is a major component of what you can call a systematic domestic ethnic cleansing program in America, being carried out against African Americans and other members of the global majority. That's all that is evidenced by the statistics that he's citing. And this, in fact, demonstrates a vastly greater degree of criminality than anything that he mentioned. And I would go further to say that the speaker himself, with the statistics that he's mentioning and the interpretation that he's putting on those statistics, that he himself occupies a propaganda role in that ethnic cleansing system, for which, in my opinion, he could and should be prosecuted under international law. So I really would hope that people would take this more seriously and understand the gravity of what so-called minority groups, members of the global majority, what they are facing and what they are enduring, and the human rights violations that are committed against them in the United States, that you would take that more seriously, so that when you see someone who is clearly playing a propaganda role in support of what, again, does constitute an ethnic cleansing program in America, when you see someone who is occupying a role of propaganda in support of that system, normalizing that system, justifying that system, rationalizing that system, understand that this person is a criminal. And inshallah, one day they will face justice for that, and should not be regarded simply as someone who is airing offensive or controversial views. No, you should take this more seriously, and not simply use it as an opportunity to have a debate with someone like this. They shouldn't be debated, they should be prosecuted.
That was an interesting take, and I don't think I've ever heard this perspective from anyone before. So, to begin with, like I said, Charlie Kirk made a strong point, especially about the issue of fathers not being around. He argued that fatherlessness in the black community contributes significantly to crime rates, highlighting that a large percentage of black children are raised without a father, and linking it to outcomes like incarceration and violent behavior. He emphasized that this is a cultural and systemic issue, not necessarily about racism or white supremacy,
And so what's
and
the
cited
reason
sources
that
like
most
Thomas
of the
Sowell to
white
support
boys
his
who
point.
shoot people
On the other hand,
grow up in
Shahid
families
Bolson
with
offered a
fathers?
broader and deeper analysis. He argued that when Charlie says black people commit more crimes, what he is really pointing to is conviction rates, not actual criminality. Shahid emphasized that African Americans are disproportionately investigated, prosecuted, and convicted, while white offenders often go unpunished. He explained that more than half of violent crimes in the U.S. go unsolved, and many unsolved cases likely involve white perpetrators, especially against African Americans or other minorities. Shahid also pointed out that African American homicide victims make up most of the unsolved cases, whereas crimes involving white victims are far more likely to be solved. He highlighted that this systemic imbalance means African Americans are more likely to be punished and even wrongfully convicted than anyone else, citing cases like Marcellus Williams to illustrate the point. He went further to frame these patterns as part of a systematic ethnic cleansing program against African Americans and other members of the global majority, arguing that the criminal justice system selectively enforces laws along racial lines. Shahid criticized Charlie for presenting statistics without context, suggesting that doing so makes him a propagandist for this system, normalizing and justifying human rights violations. He concluded that such actions are serious enough that those spreading misleading narratives about crime and race should not simply be debated. In his view, they should be prosecuted. At the end of the day, both Charlie and Shahid make points worth considering. Charlie emphasizes family structure and cultural factors, while Shahid focuses on systemic bias and injustice in law enforcement and the courts. Both perspectives are part of the conversation, and it's important to think critically about both sides. I would like to know which one you think made more sense. Let me know in the comments section.
We know which one made more sense.